Nsé.
What's shaking?
Hey, I was like, I get to be on a panel with Nsé? What?
Whatever. All the gas. You can keep all
Oh,
that gas.
I told my mom that I was about to be on it. Actually, she was very excited to know that I was going to be on a panel with you. So,
Who, your mom?
yeah, she saw your Oprah thing. She was like, "Oh, this is great." I was like, "Yeah, man."
Aw, mamas love me, man. So,
Oh,
hi. I feel like you have a name besides Street Riders.
Street, but my government name is Rico
Hi,
Washington.
hi, Rico.
Thank you everyone for tuning in and being here with us today. This is an important discussion, no doubt. And I'm so happy that our panelists have decided to give their time so generously to help us discuss all the things that we've been talking about this week. Some that we didn't anticipate talking about, but we're going to be talking about them probably. So today's discussion is going to be about the Georgia State runoffs. My name is Rico Washington, and I am a part of StreetRiders NYC. For those of you tuning in that don't know about us, StreetRiders NYC is a collective, a movement, a community. We met in protest and connected over a few weeks that led up to the protest for the George Floyd protest. We collectively shared an interest in riding while providing cycling support and protection to protest groups across the city, focusing on issues of justice for people such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, as well as police reform and racial equality. So we'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Christopher Bruce, who is the political director of the ACLU. He's been a leader in the fight for civil rights and liberties across the state and the country, state meaning the state of Georgia. He's led a campaign against suppressing the black vote in the South Atlanta area by preventing the closure of polling locations in majority black districts, including the 2016 mayoral election. In his first year as a lobbyist with the ACLU of Georgia, Chris defeated a bill which added sentencing enhancements purposefully targeting Black Lives Matter protesters. In that same year, he led a coalition to defeat legislation that would have labeled protesters as domestic terrorists. Bruce has also led a coalition of civil rights leaders and organizations that defeated legislation which would have jeopardized early voting hours and eliminated Sunday voting or souls to the polls programs. Bruce graduated cum laude from Georgia State University and obtained his law degree from the University of Georgia. He's also held positions of influence inside the ACLU of Georgia, including being on the Policy Executive Board of the Atlanta Pre-Arrest Diversion Association in the United States. Pre-Diversion Associate Program, the Executive Board for Gate City Bar Association, which is one of the oldest Black bar associations in the United States.
Rico.
Yes?
I got you, Rico. I'm a local Black man. That's it. That's cool.
Okay.
My people up there, they put all that stuff up, man. Don't
Well, this is just for the folks who don't know who you are, that may need to know a little bit more about you, but understood.
Yeah, we good. Appreciate you though, man. I definitely do. Thank you.
Okay. So the next panelist we have is Nsé Ufot, who is the CEO of the New Georgia Project. Ufot's life and career has been dedicated to working on various civil, human, and workers' rights issues. As the executive director of the New Georgia Project, she is proud to lead the organization to its goal of strengthening the state's democracy by registering and engaging Georgia's roughly 800,000 eligible but unregistered African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans. Prior to joining the New Georgia Project, Ms. Ufot worked as the assistant executive director for the Canadian Association of University Teachers, Canada's largest faculty union, and she was also the senior lobbyist and government relations officer for the American Association of University Professors. And this is where she coordinated initiatives for mobilizing members around legislation and regulations that impacted higher education and labor law. Ms. Ufot, a proud naturalized citizen, was born in Nigeria and raised in Southwest Atlanta. She earned a BSc at the Georgia Institute of Technology and a JD from the University of Dayton School of Law. Okay, so now that we have the intros out of the way, you all know who we're dealing with here. let's get down to business. Yesterday, something to see. It's really interesting to see how things played out with regard to law enforcement and things of that nature. But now that the Senate has officially taken control, the Democrats have officially taken control of the Senate, how will the new administration, in your opinion, respond to what happened yesterday? Or do you feel like it's necessary for them to respond? And anyone can jump in.
I mean, we have numerous examples of whiteness bending over backwards to protect itself. And so I think that even with the new Democratic Senate, that we are still going to have to organize, that we're still going to have clarifying conversations. We're still going to have to call the question and force the question, which side are you on, right? That like the desire for whiteness is to protect itself, to protect it, to shield itself from scrutiny. And so yes, the thing that brought these folks to the Capitol was a political candidate, right? Like they said that they were there in defense of Trump because they feel like the election was stolen. But I don't think that this is a partisan issue at all. That this is very much tied to, America's original sin, or one of America's original sins, and the role that white supremacy plays in public life. And people feeling like they've lost something. Yeah.
Or threatening against white supremacy, right? So, well, first I want to say thank you, Rico, for having me on, and Street Riders for this. This is great, especially being very targeted, saying, if you want to know what happened in Georgia, let's talk to the people in Georgia. Because I know everything that you read on my resume and stuff like that, Nsé was a part of too, like the polling closures in Atlanta, all those other things, which I know we'll jump into. But yeah, there's a lot of people in other states and other areas that have said, Georgia's never going to turn blue. Nothing's ever going to happen. There's no point of investment. But there are people who are doing this work like Nsé for years of getting people out, specifically targeting Black people, to actually get these type of results. Going to what happened yesterday is a direct relation of what happens when you actually see a will of the people. More people voted in this election, general and runoff election, than ever before. People are upset because, people in power like to stay in power, especially white people. So, and they'll do whatever it takes. To me, this was nothing but sedition, an insurrection, and a coup. It was an attack on our United States of America. There's no reason why those people should have been escorted or dispersed. They all should have been arrested and charged with treason and every other crime out there. I think they rounded up about 30 people for breaking Mayor Browser's curfew. That's not enough. I mean, these people had an assault on our Capitol by a president who still refuses to condemn white supremacy and every other factions within it. So yes, there's 13 days left of his presidency, but I think this is definitely a time that you should invoke your 25th Amendment, because he should not be in power for one more day. I don't know if Pence got the picture when Trump was throwing him under the bus too, saying that he needs to stop things, but eventually there needs to be an awakening. I think yesterday there should have been an awakening for over 4 years now with Trump on the ballot and all his presidency. But then I think as congressmen, Democrats and Republicans were literally covering in the United States Capitol with gas masks. They were like, maybe this has gone too far. So now Republicans are going to have to say, how do we walk this back? And honestly, it may be too late. So they have a very real reckoning within their party. All I want is what everybody else wants in America, which is justice. And letting these people go without any type of treatment within our criminal system is not justice.
Agreed. And you would think that that would not be too much to ask for. Unfortunately, time and time again, we've seen that it seems to be the case. And say you touched on something when you said people who feel like they're losing something. The presidential election that happened in November, flipped Georgia blue, and then we turned around and did it again with the runoffs. And so why do you feel, thank you for your work, appreciate it. But how does that, correlate to the demographics in the state itself? Because it's been Republican for a very long time.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a couple things that people need to know, right? So Georgia became elected its first Republican governor, I think in like 2000, right, yeah, around 2000. So only about 20 years. Before that, Democrats controlled Georgia government for 130 years. The challenge is, though, these are Dixiecrats. And I think that distinction is really important, right? And I think that's also important to set some context. So when we're talking about the young Black people, young people of color that we registered to vote, that showed up and voted in this moment, who say that the parties are indistinguishable, there's a history that sort of underscores that in a place like Georgia, again, where Dixiecrats ran the government for 130 years. I will say that a lot has been written about sort of the browning of America, right? So the expectations by 2050, white people will be the minority in the US, and it'll be a plurality of Black, Latinx, Asian Americans, and indigenous folks who make up the majority of Georgians. But nowhere is that demographic shift happening more aggressively, more acutely than in Georgia. I tell people that the demographic shifts that are happening in Georgia, they are massive. They're happening very, very quickly, and they're unique, right? So I'm talking about nearly 2 million people have moved to the state in the past decade. The majority of them are people of color. And it's unique because unlike a place like Arizona, which is also going through its demographic shift, the demographic shifts that are happening in Georgia are being driven by Black folks, so Caribbean and African immigrants, but also what political scientists and demographers are referring to as the reversal of the Great Migration, right? So the Great Migration between the 1920s and the 1970s, Black folks fled the South and went up north to flee racialized violence, but also seeking economic opportunities. That's why there's so many Black people in Chicago who can trace their roots to Mississippi, right? So many Black people in New York and New Jersey who trace their roots to the Carolinas and to Georgia. And now folks are moving back south. I like to joke and say, listen, the traffic in Atlanta is terrible. We full. You should go check out Charlotte. I hear it's lovely this time of year. But the truth of the matter is that we are in this political moment that we're in because, in part, of the demographic shifts that are happening. So Black folks from the West Coast, Black folks from the East Coast, Black folks from the Midwest, all coming, college educated in a lot of instances, middle income, higher income folks. And again, it has changed Georgia politics. And so 2025, we're talking about in 4 years, Georgia is going to be the first state in the Deep South with a white minority. And so African Americans, again, they're sort of Black, brown, and gold coalition is going to make up a plurality. And so what does that mean for our politics? What does that mean for our policies? I happen to be of the belief that I don't think that demographics automatically equal destiny. You can look at a bunch of majority Black counties in Georgia where sheriff deputies will still crack people's skulls. Listen, Glenn County, Brunswick, Georgia, majority Black, they shot Ahmaud Arbery cold. And then the prosecutor held on to the videotape for 74 days before charging anyone. And so demographics do not automatically equal destiny. And so I say that if demographics is the fire, then organizing is the accelerant. Organizing is the gas that we've poured on the fire to hasten, to bring about these changes in the Deep South.
Got it. Okay. So with
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go
well,
ahead, Chris.
no, I was gonna say no. I think Nsé answered that perfectly. So there's nothing much more to ask about that.
Christopher, you've never said that in, in the
Welcome to
years that I've known you.
2021. Yeah, new year, new. No, that was great. That was perfect. Oh no, I'm still in your quote too. Demographics do not equal destiny. Boom. Let me put that in the chat to make sure we're good.
I love it.
Going back to the presidential election of November last year, did the voting patterns that, I mean, because you obviously, Nsé, had done a lot of grassroots organizing. Did any of the voting patterns, and Chris, you could jump in as well, did any of the voting patterns that you saw from early voting to, you know, how long people were willing to wait online to actually cast their ballots, did that, any of that kind of like give you an idea of how the Senate runoff vote would go? Because, you know, obviously the presidential election will pull out more of the electorate and bring them more of those to the polls than the runoffs would. What did you learn from what happened in the 2020 election that kind of gave you, I guess, some insight as to how the Senate runoffs would go?
I learned that one, we have some bellwether counties and some bellwether precincts that, and I'm always working to tweak and refine that list. So when people think about Georgia and elections in Georgia, or just Georgia in general, folks think it's like Atlanta and not Atlanta, like, and that's it. And the truth of the matter is that there's 7 metropolitan areas, right? 7 major cities, but then also what is known as the rural Black Belt. So a lot of times when people are talking about rural voters, it's code for white conservative, but that's not the case in Georgia at all. There's like 20 counties in the state that are majority Black, and most of them are in rural parts of the state. And so I think that I saw that turnout was extraordinarily high. We were breaking records legit like every day during the November general election. The thing that was hard to tell though was, were we still going to see a surge on election day, or are people choosing to vote early, and that will that cut into election day turnouts? And so like there's just a whole bunch of like trying to read the tea leaves and trying to understand where people's like attitudes are. Here's the other thing. I think that the way that it got covered across the country was that this was like a Trump backlash, right? Or anti-Trump sentiment. And so that we would expect a significant drop off in the runoff, because if you don't have Trump on the ballot, then you don't have anybody to hate. First of all, you don't underestimate people's capacity to hate. Like there's always more where that came from, number one. But number two, the Trump administration has had an impact on a lot of our politics. I liken him to like a big head baby who's like learning how to walk, right? And you know that he's learning how to walk. You know that he is a danger to himself and others. So you try to protect him. But what the members of his party did was put a 45 in his hand, put a Glock in his hand. And you don't put that in the hands of a toddler that's learning how to walk. And so the violence, the attacks on democratic norms, on our institutions, was all over the place. And it's been really, really difficult to pull it back. So people showed up, yes, because of anti-Trump sentiment. People also showed up because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And the 3 states in the country that have are so behind on giving people vaccines: Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. People, the Republicans in the Georgia state legislature cut $1 billion from the education budget in the middle of a pandemic, right? That they literally got one piece of major legislation passed because of COVID, and it was to cut $1 billion from our education budget. So people were motivated for a whole bunch of reasons. There's a hospital down in Southwest Georgia, near where Albany, Georgia is, that closed the week before the election because of the state's failure to expand Medicaid. And like, COVID was on the rise at the time. So folks, the hospitals were running out of beds. People still having babies. People still fighting cancer. And by the way, hospitals tend to be like the largest employer, particularly in rural communities. So we closing hospitals left and right. Black folks had a lot of reasons to show up for the polls, and not being pleased with the Trump administration was only one of them. So I knew that they were going to come back if we talked to them, if we communicate how important the runoffs were, and if their votes weren't suppressed.
And that's what I really want to point out. Their votes weren't suppressed as much this election, okay? Because voter suppression still exists in Georgia. Don't think that what happened on November 3rd, what happened on January 5th is just a fluke. It took years to fight to get to this point of trying to be able to get people of color to vote. And now the first thing that you have out of certain legislators' mouths is, oh, we need to take away absentee ballots. Why do you need to take away absentee ballots now when an election didn't go in your favor, when elections before it was just fine, but now it's got to be fraud, right? So going back to, and I hate to do this, Nsé, because I could comment on your previous question, is people in power like to stay in power, right? People in power will do what it takes to stay in power. And this isn't on a moralistic spectrum or anything else. This is more of, I was gifted this power and this privilege from my father, who got it from their father, who got it from their father. This is all I know. What do you mean I have to compete with someone else? What do you mean I have to actually listen to others and distribute wealth and resources, which we have an abundance of? It's just that people in power love to keep it. And they love to keep it by suppressing Black people. That's what typically happens. So what happened, like Nsé was saying before, what happened on November 3rd and what happened on January 5th was a realization of what could be if people actually do come out and vote. And hammering that message around is really what happened. So I will tell you the truth, winning's the easy part. The hard part is showing what you can actually bring to bear once you are in office. Because if you don't have anything to show for it, people aren't going to come back out and do the same thing. So as much as you said, come out on November 3rd, early vote, all that other stuff, you can't come back in another 4 years and say, well, I need you to come back out. Well, what did you do? Don't worry about it. Just vote for me. These people aren't going to deal with it. And a lot of people put their names on the line, their lives on the line, their time on the line. And if there's no type of results, which they were saying, you get Biden in the office, we'll have some results. Okay, well, let's come back out. And you got to get these 2 senators too. Let's do it. Now it's on them to actually show us what it is. Otherwise, and not even 4 years, 2 years, right, when you have the midterm elections. If nothing happens, those gains are gone.
Absolutely. Do you think that would have an impact on the Democratic Party and, like, I guess, any of the people down the line that would be running under the Democratic ticket against these 2, Warnock and Ossoff, if they did not show up and shine, so to say?
So you're talking about Warnock and Ossoff being primaried, or you're talking about their Republican opponents?
No, primary.
Oh, primary. Yes, absolutely. Because as much as they had an agenda and they put it forth for everybody else, there's still others who are saying you could be more progressive, or you could be more moderate, but you could be more progressive. So if people are saying, well, you didn't put forth these bills like you promised to in this certain amount of time, but you didn't do anything else, people have every right to challenge them in an election for a primary, openly and fairly. So it's up to them to show people what is it going to take or why you should send me back to office under this plan. Otherwise, I tell people all the time, if you don't want like what your legislator's doing, then get somebody else. So this is like a, I'm not trying to protect elected officials at all. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. I just want people to work for the people all together. And if you can't show that, we'll find somebody who can.
Good. I'm glad you said that. So with that being said, the opportunity for those two seats, if also Warnock were not, doing things that I guess the people who voted them into office thought they should be doing, do you feel like there's an opportunity for those votes next election cycle to flip red?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Georgia is not a blue state. It is a battleground state. What that means is that people are going to have to fight for everybody's vote for a long time. I mean, the Biden-Trump vote differential was 0.25%, right? So we're talking about 11,000 votes out of 5 million. Even Ossoff was lucky enough to cross the threshold to the point where he was out of automatic recount territory, but that's still a 1.1% vote difference, right? And so it can absolutely flip red. And again, the legacy of voter suppression is still very much alive in Georgia. Chris started to go through the list, but I think the reason why the November election, but particularly this Tuesday's election, was so remarkable was one, not only was there super high turnout for a runoff, but Black voters did it. Sorry, my dog is so disrespectful. Hey, I'm trying to be professional here. They did it. The state cut early voting days, the number of days we have for early voting. They cut the number of early voting locations, so the places where people could go vote. They cut the number of drop boxes where people could drop off their mail-in ballots and not have to go inside. They tried to purge 350,000 voters in the last days before the election in almost half of Georgia's counties. The Secretary of State and others, including the president, trafficked in all this misinformation and disinformation, polluting our airwaves with all these lies. He put out a notice a week before the election saying that he would criminally prosecute individuals and organizations like ours who try to provide comfort to voters who had to wait in long lines. So it's called line warming, where you hand out, bottles of water, hot chocolate, slices of pizza to voters if they have to wait in crazy long lines. It's one of the services, one of the acts of service that we provide to our community, and told us that folks would be prosecuted if they engaged in line warming activity. So all of this is the context in which we still saw Black voters and voters of color and young voters in particularly show up in historic numbers. And so I say all that to say that none of this is guaranteed. This is not a permanent condition, that we're still gonna have to organize, that we're still gonna have to fight for enhanced protections of voters, because they're coming. They've already said, oh, when the legislature starts up next week or in 2 weeks, Christopher can tell us when, that they're at the top of their agenda is voting rights reforms, as if they that the results of these two elections, which are probably the most secure elections in Georgia history, is an indication of something's wrong. And the problem is that it's back to a loss of power. 71% of white voters in Georgia voted for Trump, and he still lost. And so people are having a hard time accepting the fact that 3 out of 4 white folks, over 3 out of 4 white people can vote for a fascist, and that it still won't determine the outcome of the election. And so they've never had to have coalition politics. And so it's a new day in Georgia, a new day in the South, and people are very uneasy about what that means for the status quo.
Let me add on to that too, because Nsé said it's a battleground state. I completely agree. I also call it a bellwether state, where if you actually do put in policies that resonate with people, especially Black people, and I'm glad you brought up the policies and the population of who voted for Trump and who didn't. Because remember, in 2016, was it 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump? And we saw actually an increase. As much as people were talking about, oh no, white women aren't going that way, they're going to go the other way for Democrats because Trump is horrible. You saw an actual increase in the amount of white women that actually voted for him. So more white people are voting for this guy, or more people of color are actually being empowered to vote as well. And that's the only thing that could really happen. It's like everybody's waking up and saying, we have to make a difference. Otherwise, people aren't. But again, I go back to people in power like to stay in power. They're saying it doesn't matter how horrible this guy is. I still want to have access, resources, and wealth beyond sharing it with other people as well. So I think, especially people of color, we never really take our point of view from white people's point of view of saying, of course, I like to live in my house or anything else. So with what's happening in the legislature starts on Monday, it goes into everything else. I know Nsé's just completely exhausted. I'm exhausted. We haven't had a break since last year, because even 2020, we started with a legislative session, shut down, then we had to go to COVID-19, then we had Ahmaud Arbery, then we had the primary election, then we go back to a general election, and then we get a runoff. And according to this is literally December 38th of 2020, based off of what happened. Like 2020 is not over, right? Yesterday was crazy. We will never see something like that in our lifetimes again. Hopefully not.
I hope not.
Yeah, I'm still counting on 2020. This is like December 28th, 38th, one of the craziest years of our lives. And then we got to go into a legislative session when people are like, too many Black people voted. Something's wrong. We need to take it away. So the fight continues. And I can't tell people enough. Fighting in the South, I love what I do. I love the people I do, but it is stressful. It's traumatic. There are no breaks, but you do see the results of it. And what you saw in November and what you saw on January 5th were the results of it.
Got you. So one of the things that started to pop back up after the runoff results came in and were confirmed was the tweet from Senator Lindsey Graham in 2016, who famously said, that if the Republican Party actually nominated Trump, that it would be destroyed and it would deserve it. In what ways do you feel like, or do you feel like there were enough Republicans who looked at Trump, if not in the beginning, throughout the course of his tenure, and said, this is repugnant, I'm not going to support this? We saw yesterday that 122 Congress members actually objected to Biden's confirmation. What do you make of this Republican, these Republicans that are still digging their heels into the fact that the president needs to be supported and these election results should be challenged?
I mean, they're treasonous, like period, point blank. And the sort of indignation in this moment is low-key falling on deaf ears. Like, you stood by, I mean, Charlottesville, right? Kids in cages at the borders, family separation, like on and on and on. There's so many egregious violations of norms and decency, encouraging foreign interference in our elections. Just y'all still ain't seen his tax returns, and then until the last year of his election. And so, like, it really showed that I feel like this was like drunk grandpa politics, right? That Trump was their drunk grandpa, and they kept giving him alcohol so they could run his pockets, right? So that you could, like, grandpa might have a problem, right? But like, they're feeding him whatever he needed so that they could give themselves trillions of dollars in tax cuts. And that's what we saw, that there were the wealthy elite stealing from working people, double dipping, triple dipping out of the tax base that, we have, nurses who pay more in taxes than some of these corporate CEOs, and they were fine with it. I was having a conversation with my dad a few months ago, and was like, man, like, how is it that like these hardcore conservatives will allow this to happen? Like, this can't be what they imagined when they talk about the conservative principles that they ran on. And he was like, it's not about principles, it's about money. He was like, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, these people, Hugo Boss made the uniforms that Nazi soldiers wore, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Hugo Boss?
Hugo Boss.
Man, I used to shop
made
there.
the uniforms that Nazi soldiers got the government contract
Googling
to
this.
make the, please go for it. So the world can see you confirm how right I always am.
I was learning something outside the inside.
Right? So they got the government contract to make those uniforms. Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen made the trucks that Nazis drove around in. And so the idea is like, how can you do that when you see all these human atrocities, when you see all this suffering happening? And the answer is, it was about the paper. It was about the bread. And so following the money, I think, is always an important part of our organizing as we talk about what goes forward. So A, the Republican Party is absolutely fractured right now. B, I don't know what that means for them going forward, because C, they have demonstrated over and over and over again their willingness to ignore like basic decency. I don't know, the Geneva Convention, the rule of law, in pursuit of their financial goals.
One, I'm taken aback at the things were said. My favorite sweater is a Hugo Boss sweater, so I got to get rid of it now. Yeah. Let's look at it this way, especially coming from Georgia, where I believe, and I don't think anybody will really dispute this, our governor, Brian Kemp, is probably the #1 supporter of Donald Trump and his presidency. Anything that Trump said to do, he would do it. In fact, when they were saying, hey, states need to open back up during the COVID-19, let's let the economy go, our governor opened up. And when that got back to Donald Trump, he said, oh no, it's too early, don't do it, and threw him under the bus. And has continuously thrown him under the bus, even towards yesterday and Monday, of saying, I'm going to come back down here, this is President Trump, and I'm going to campaign against your governor to make sure he's not governor anymore. A #1 supporter of this guy, literally, and this guy is like throwing him under the bus. That's why you had a Secretary of State, put in your head, you had a Secretary of State who was on a phone with a president of the United States who's saying, you need to find 11,780 votes to make sure that Georgia won for Trump instead of Biden. And think about that too. The side note is he only wanted to win by 1 vote. Like, that doesn't make him like not a man. I was like, come on, bro. Like, if you're gonna cheat, then cheat big, not just by 1, because that's not suspicious at all. So what I don't get within human nature, like, you have 1 time to mess up with me. You have one time to lie to me. You have one time to fool with me, and I'm done. After that, there's nothing else to talk about. Republicans have been thrown under the bus by this president so many times, and I have really no idea why they continuously go back to him, except that they created their own problem. They created their own monster. They realize that he attracts a certain demographic of people that really do not care about the rule of law, that really do not care about anything that comes with equality, and would like to go back to more of a white supremacist type of nature within it. So once you let that monster out of the bag, it's kind of hard to put it back in. And now they're scrambling around and trying to figure out what to do. But what they're doing in place is that they are literally assassinating each other in pure chaos. And all I can say is they deserve it. They literally, because the people are warned, do not do this, because this guy is wild. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he's dangerous. And we saw the results of that yesterday. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. So with regard to organizing, trying to get more people activated, mobilized, and registered, and to stand in line and actually wait it out to cast their ballot. Black people have been seen as, the folks that have pulled up the rear time and time again with regard to, these types of elections. Georgia did it twice, to a lot of people's surprise and shock and awe and maybe disappointment. But I'm wondering if you could, both of you, talk about what was going on the ground. Like we talk, a lot about Stacey Abrams and how she's kind of like, the face of tenacity when it comes to these things in Georgia. But there's so many people who are on the ground, so many organizations that were helping those efforts. Talk to me about the strategies that were employed to try and get all of these people who may have not been registered before, never even thought about being registered, or may have been dealing with, coming out and being formally incarcerated and not knowing that they actually had the right to vote again. What did you, both of you can answer this question. What was done over the course of the past 4 years, or even, longer than that? I'm sure you can tell me the history to try and come to these two victories that we saw back to back.
You want to go ahead, Chris?
I don't know. I'll let you go first. I just finished talking. I can. It's up.
Okay. Go for it. Well,
Okay. Go ahead.
This is us being Southern and polite. So, first of all, Stacey's a queen. I think that, a lot of this, like the attention that the state has received, a lot of the investment, you can draw a direct line to her organizing, to her historic run, to the theft of a governor's seat, and to the fact that the entire world watched the governor's seat be stolen and nothing, and no one held accountable in the aftermath. But I mean, we've registered 500,000 Black and brown folks in all 159 of Georgia's counties, right? So not only are we working to turn people out, but we're expanding the electorate and making Georgia's elections more competitive. We worked with our FIPs, formerly incarcerated persons, people that have registered to vote once they get off paper, is the reference is how we say it in the South, but basically once they've satisfied the terms of their sentence. We had about 50 FIPs who had all had their rights restored as canvassers and organizers, knocking on doors in communities where there is a high, in zip codes where there are a high number of returning citizens. We had a dope caravan that was led by a bunch of formerly incarcerated folks, and pastors and rappers and celebrities that went from Magic City, which is a famous strip club in Atlanta, to a restaurant. And the idea was that, they were out, they were loud, they were proud, talking about the idea that they should not be, that we should not be judged by the worst mistake that people have made, that there should be a place for people, that we should be a country, a state, a city of second chances. And that disenfranchising people, taking away the right to vote because they were convicted of a felony is a direct tie to slavery. And to the immediate years after slavery, where members of the dominant society were trying to maintain control over a newly freed Black population in the Deep South. And so it's not lost on me that the places with the most restrictive laws around formerly incarcerated people and the right to vote are in the Deep South, where formerly enslaved people at one point outnumbered the white minority that had oppressed them. And so this was another way to control formerly oppressed people. It's not lost on me that in places like Maine and Vermont, not only do you never lose your right to vote, even if you're convicted of a felony, but you can be in prison and vote in Maine and Vermont, two of the whitest states in our nation, right? We knocked on 2 million doors and had high quality face-to-face conversations with Black folks. We made 7 million phone calls, sent over 4 million text messages. That's how we got to this place, right? And that's not an apparatus or an infrastructure that you can erect overnight. We've been in these streets for years, building relationships. We've built a network of over 1,100 churches and mosques and synagogues, because while y'all are heathens, Black folks in the South still go to church and to the mosque and to synagogues. And so thinking about faith in public life and how voting is an act of faith, and that, looking for moral leadership, and that you can, that voting is also a way to express your values. So we lean in hard. And again, but those relationships are built over time. That infrastructure is built over time, but that's how the South was won.
Boom. And I'm gonna start off just the way that you started off too. Leader Abrams is phenomenal with her thought processes and the execution of everything else. Now, a lot of people deserve credit for what's happening in Georgia, but for me personally, talking to someone, Leader Abrams had a mindset of, she was really the first Democrat to say, we shouldn't be targeting Republicans to start crossing over voting for Democrats, right? We have enough Democrats out here, especially Black and brown people, who we have not targeted at all, that the entire Democratic Party has completely forgotten about. Why don't we start talking to them instead of talking to Republicans, which we know it takes a lot to turn a Republican, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, turn a Republican to a Democrat. It practically doesn't happen. But to get a Black person to come out and vote, you just gotta talk to them and say, hey, bro, we can get you better employment. We can get you better access to schools and education. We're not going to cut your education or your healthcare. We want to expand it. So
Stacey likes to say that it's one thing to try to get a Catholic to convert to Islam, that we're just trying to get Black people to go to church.
That's
right. And there's a fundamentally different type of conversation.
It's the whole mentality within it. And the conversations of, we've had previous people who ran for statewide office who would try to do that type of thing where they were focusing on white voters, changing. But yeah, now you're seeing the results of actually targeting Black people. And within me, I call out both ways. I've seen racist Republicans and I've seen racist Democrats. What I want to see is more Black people at the table. Because once you have that, again, power sharing really goes into, well, now that we have Black people at the table, you have to address Black issues. So, and the reason why you have to address those Black issues, because we have to go back to those communities of saying, you elected us, now what are you going to do? How is it going to pay off? So no, ACLU is not a grassroots organization at all, but we like to support grassroots organizations like New Georgia Project. So when it came down to, like you were saying, felony disenfranchisement, people, it amazes me. Yes, in other states, people in prison can vote, and I'm perfectly fine with it. I think is like, what are people who are incarcerated going to vote for? That's like crazy or anything else. This is one of the factors that lets you get back into society in a peaceful and restorative manner. So yes, let anyone who has been arrested and serving time, let them be able to vote, and stop putting up all these barriers against them of trying to stop them from doing that. So yeah, being down at the Capitol and fighting for things like that and easing it up. We're definitely not there in Georgia, and it will be a continuous conversation that's going on. When it comes to elections, again, taking more of a Stacey Abrams model of focusing on Black people and low propensity voters. Well, they're low propensity, let's make them into medium and high propensity voters. How? By talking to them, by seeing what their issues are, listening to them, and then saying, yes, we can do that, and this is how you do it. It's more coming up with a support structure. When it was the uh, before June 9th, the average age of a poll worker in the state of Georgia was 72 years old. 72, which is why we had our June 9th primary. And during that primary, a lot of people of that age group who are the most susceptible to COVID-19 literally said, I'm out. I'm not doing this. Why am I exposing myself to this? And that's why you got 5 to 6 hour lines in other areas. So
11-hour line.
11 hours. I mean, crazy. Last person to vote in the state of Georgia was at 12:32 a.m. the next day. You waiting in line for over 6 hours. Like, it's ridiculous. So
and the polls close at 7.
And the polls close, right.
So that means that person got in line at least before 7 o'clock.
Right. And still waited the whole time.
Right.
So what gets to me, bringing this back to policy, down at the Capitol when they were saying, well, we need to shut down on early voting and everything else, and there's no problems with voting because in my district, people were able to vote within 5 to 10 minutes. Well, that is literally one of the factors of voter suppression, saying, well, in your white majority district, you can get in and out in 5 or 10 minutes, while in these Black districts, people have 5 or 6 hour wait times. That's a problem. And for you, Senator, not to recognize that, it's a problem within yourself as too. So I always couch voter suppression in like 3 buckets. One is racism. There are people who are racist out there who do not want Black people to vote, never did, never will. The other is mostly ignorance. So there are other people who are saying, well, everything's fine in my area. I don't care what Black people are doing. That's still voter suppression. You're not trying to solve the problem or equate it to anything else. And the third one is mostly what we dealt with this year and previous years, incompetence. There's a lot of people in your board of elections who have no idea what to do. And when you shine a spotlight on them, it's like, what is wrong with y'all? They'll either retreat back or they'll say, oh, you guys are doing too much. So this year we took a different approach, and instead of just suing the hell out of them, we said, why don't we work with you? So literally talking to the board of elections and saying, well, what do you need? We need more competent poll workers. Great. We have college students. We have other people. We have lawyers. So we went, I also serve on a state bar's board of directors. If you can go and put forth a plan where poll workers who are attorneys need CLE credits, why can't they do this type of training and get CLE credits? That got pushed through the state bar. But you give me an inch, I'm gonna take a mile. So I said, well, why don't we go ahead and put an attorney at every polling location in Fulton County so they could actually go and deal with absentee ballots. So if there's any question about absentee ballots, you have somebody who has under professionalism and ethics standards to say, hey, we can help you solve that problem. Huge successful program to the point where Fulton County asked to do it again. 255, a lawyer at every polling precinct that the poll managers appreciated. And then after all, again, targeting Black voters, saying, well, we'll send out mailers, we'll send out anybody else, of saying, we know that nobody's talked to you before, we're talking to you now. And we're probably not the only ones to do it. So the more times that you actually hear from it, expanding the electorate instead of continuously keeping the same people in power or the same people to know what's like going on. That's what we were mostly focusing on. this past election. And anything that popped up, when I tell you there are about 18 other organizations who were saying, we're on it, let's go and let's fix this problem. That's what you need to do, because injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. You see a problem, it needs to be clamped down. Those problems are still going to arise. Now the battle turns after the elections from on the ground to in the state capitol. And still keeping people engaged is going to be the key.
Understood. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of the session, and I wanted to open it up for anyone who had any questions that they would like to have the panelists answer. We have one question already from Luis. He's asking, is the idea of voter IDs beneficial? Can it help people vote from any location, or is it another form of suppression? And what about voting by smartphone?
Okay, Luis. That's where I want to go. So a couple things. One, voter ID is absolutely a tool of voter suppression. Like there was a time where, like, if you could bring in a utility bill, like the idea is to verify yourself. And as somebody that works directly in voter engagement, I know how hard it is to get people to come out and vote once. So the idea that there are like tons of people who are pretending to be somebody else is just absolutely ridiculous. And there are a number of ways that people can credential themselves and prove their identities. And so voter ID is definitely, it's a race neutral way to make it more difficult for Black folks and people of color, young people, poor folks, and seniors to vote. I remember that there was a person that we helped register to vote, and she needed an ID. She was born in rural Georgia at a time before birth certificates were mandatory. And I want to be clear, that was like 1971, 1972. And that the record of their birth, one of the ways that people would record your birth is to put it in a Bible, in the family Bible. So we found the family Bible that had the record of her birth. We found the pastor, luckily, who was still alive, and got him to swear an affidavit, right? And like a whole bunch of documents, because there was nothing proving her birth year. There's a lot of ways for her to say who she was, but she couldn't get cancer treatments, and she couldn't get she wasn't able to register to vote because she did not have a Georgia ID. So like there's just tons of stuff. People come home from prison and need to get ID, like folks who are indigent, houseless, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, it's a tool of voter suppression. I think that we should be thinking about how to innovate in voting. I feel like, one, astronauts vote via email. We've been voting the same way for 100 years. People are comfortable moving their money online, banking from their smartphones. Why can't we bank, or why can't we vote from our smartphones? I think that blockchain, which is the technology behind like Bitcoin and all of that, provides some interesting solutions, some interesting opportunities to maintaining security, but we lack political will in this moment. And so I think that, some education needs to happen, but I definitely think that there is room to have safe, secure elections via smartphones.
And we all know that this has been the most securest election in history that has ever happened before. I mean, our own intelligence agencies have said it after the Russians hacked into and manipulated our elections in 2016. So this whole voter fraud and everything else, typically, I guess it's what people use when they lose because they have nothing else to go by. They didn't say, well, we lost on our policies or really trying to invigorate people. They lost because, of course, there has to be fraud. I'm with Nsé when it comes to it. Like, blockchain technology is the wave of the future, and there's a political will to do it. And again, I'll go back to it. Most of your elected officials are not that bright, so they don't understand that you can securely vote from your phone because it identifies you altogether. So we can get to that point eventually, but it's going to come with education.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question about the recent runoffs in which the incumbents out of the blue seem to get behind the $2,000 stimulus payment, whereas the Republicans in the Senate, most notably Mitch McConnell, was opposed to it. Do you feel like that was, did that work to the detriment of Republican voters in certain districts in Georgia?
Oh, it goes back to what I was saying before. I'm gonna shuck and jive whatever I gotta do for those 3 months that you're voting. I'm gonna give you whatever you want. You want $2,000? Here, that's all you're asking for? Just two? Oh, that person down in the Caribbean that's being held in jail, the white girl, because she didn't pay attention to COVID-19 restrictions. Let's write her a letter, even though we've never done that before in our office before. Let's do it. Let's actually become elected officials when it's time for an election to come by. But after that, for 6 years, you're not going to hear anything from me. So it doesn't surprise me that they were actually doing their jobs at that time. And as far as does it hurt or help? I don't think they really care. I think they really just cared about, am I going to get elected or not? As far as other Republicans go, you can talk to Mitch McConnell. I always said it was a talking point. If you elect these people, you get an extra $2,000 in your bank account. And if you elect these people, you don't. So that was a very easy message to go by. So again, it's a reckoning that Republicans are going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. Like that was what we saw as well. I think the secondary, like the underlying message that we sort of surfaced out and ran some digital ads with it and like incorporated it into our script was that Senators Loeffler and Perdue think y'all stupid, that they think that Georgia voters are stupid because they voted for the $2,000 aid, COVID aid. But if we vote them in office, that would guarantee that Mitch McConnell would remain the majority leader. And so voting for them would guarantee that we would not get the $2,000 aid that we needed. And so like playing games, right? Like it was a nonsense, a nothing vote for them because if they were successful, y'all weren't gonna get it no way. And so having those kinds of conversations with young people, but taking the time to explain the process and just how cold the finesse actually is. Like not only made sure that they went out and voted, but it also made sure that they gave the game to all of their friends in the group chat so that they went out and voted and understood what was going on.
Gotcha.
We're in those group chats. That's where it goes down in the DM.
My DMs are very dry. I don't know what you're talking about.
Man, it's COVID dry.
Okay, so the last question we have, in light of yesterday's insurrection, do you see Trump lasting in office until inauguration?
I mean, there's a bunch of cowardly lions in the Republican Party. And so, I mean, Elaine Cho, yes, Mitch McConnell's wife, but she's also the Secretary of Transportation. Like folks are dropping like flies because they don't want to have to vote to impeach Trump or to vote to remove him from office. I mean, I don't know. Let's just make sure that the big head baby doesn't spray the rest of what's remaining of our country with the AK-47 that should have never been in his hands in the first place in the last 13 days. I mean, it's a fun, not fun, but it's an interesting exercise to sort of turn over in one's mind, like all of the ways that we can get him out of the paint. But the truth of the matter is that his party lacks courage. And folks are just trying to contain an awful situation until we can get the Biden-Harris administration inaugurated. And then, you know, folks can pursue criminal claims against private citizen Trump.
My question is, what will it take? Like, what does he have to do? Literally, because he's literally done everything in the book. What will it take for you to stand up and say, you got to go? Because the 25th Amendment is clear. If he cannot execute the duties of his office, which he hasn't done since day one,
come on,
you need to go.
Yeah.
And your cabinet knows that. his cabinet may not be the most moral, but they're intelligent enough to say, this guy is dangerous. He needs to be removed from office. And I'm not a fan of Mike Pence either, but I at least know that he's not going to give secrets to foreign governments or pat them on the back and things like that. I don't think he is. And I don't think that he's going to do some other things, because that's what people are saying. Remove him from office. Well, you have Pence up there to do something else. What I'll end with is Donald Trump broke the law. Okay? If this was Barack Obama, he would have been kicked out in handcuffs, chains, whatever. There is no question about it. And I think we saw the dichotomy within it with what happened yesterday. These rioters went into the Capitol and they attacked it, compared to BLM protests that were happening down there that were done peacefully. This nation needs a reckoning within itself. But if you truly believe in law and order, those dog whistle terms, get your own boy and get him now, because he needs to go.
Now, there's a question just quickly about the actual time that it would take to execute that with regard to the 25th Amendment, and that 2 weeks would be too short of a time period. Chris, as lawyer.
They can do that in one day.
They can do that now.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between what happens in the House with impeachment and removal from office compared to invoking the 25th Amendment, which is why we have it. Like, if the president is incapacitated, you need to have the continuation of power.
Yeah. If Trump got hit by a bus, they would enact the 25th Amendment and make Mike Pence the president within minutes. So, like, yeah, that's not true.
Right. So yeah, no, we'll get through the fake news. Let's get right to it.
Vicky, they lying to you, girl.
Right. But then going back to what Nsé said, like, a lot of people, our U.S. attorney literally resigned on Monday because after that phone call was released with him and the Secretary of State. Why? Well, he never said why, but I would suspect as a U.S. attorney, he has a constitutional duty to investigate criminal activities, and asking somebody to overturn an election is criminal. So he was like, I'm not dealing with it. I'm gone. The Secretary of Transportation, everybody, they're just dropping out instead of doing their jobs.
Right.
Right. It's easier to do something that's passive than to actually put your first foot forward and get it done.
Right.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for today. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you to Nsé Ufot of the New Georgia Project and Christopher Bruce of the ACLU Georgia. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I encourage everyone to follow their organizations on social media, because the fight is not over, and it helps to stay abreast of what they're doing to make sure that you know how you can help that fight. It's been great.
Yeah, be easy.
Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all stay safe. All right.
Bye.
All right.
Peace.